But now it is time for us to hear from Ingrid Nixon. Ingrid, are you there?
I am here, coming to
Okay.
you from the wilds of Southeast Alaska.
Me.
Yeah, and it's really kind of fun with this whole span of time zones that we're working at. So it's sort of mid-afternoon for us.
Yeah, well, we're here in the future, and just know that things are still about where they were. Nothing has changed.
Awesome. Awesome.
The stage is yours.
Great. So I am about 8 years old, and I am walking with my grandmother along the beach in Victoria, British Columbia. And as we're walking along, my grandmother and I, we are not walking side by side. We're apart. We're not talking. We are both looking down at the ground, at the sand and at the rocks. Because I only knew the grandmother on my father's side of the family. And she was not the kind of grandmother who would just in exuberance just grab my hand and swing it along as we walked down the beach. She wasn't the type of grandmother who would reach out and sort of wrap her arms around me and pull me onto her ample lap and say, "Tell me about your day." She wasn't the type of grandmother who might notice that you were feeling a little bit down and go, "Let me make you a cup of hot chocolate. You can tell me what's up and maybe we can talk about that." You know, maybe a grandmother who would share wisdom from her long life. My grandmother was not like that. She was very slim, angular, British. And the whole idea that children should be seen and not heard was definitely a page from her playbook. But on this particular day, she had introduced me to sea glass. And you know, sea glass, you know, broken bottles and other glass objects, they fall into the ocean, and then the waves pick them up and pound those shards of glass against the sand and the rocks, and over time they lose their hard edges. Well, as we were walking along that beach, I was finding these pieces of glass, like white glass and green glass and brown glass, and my favorite, the rare blue glass. And so when we were done walking on the beach, I had this little handful of sea glass. And when we went back to my grandmother's cottage, she took down a little jar that used to hold jam, and we put my sea glass in that jar, and then she filled it up with water, and we screwed on the lid. And I took that jar of sea glass home, and I put it on the window ledge at my family's house. And it is there to this day. But I have always loved the way the light shines through that sea glass. But you know, a grandmother who would have shared wisdom with me, that would have been nice at certain times in my life. You know, when you're growing up and things are just kind of confusing, like, adolescence. It would have been nice to have a grandmother who would have said, "My dear, you must brace yourself." Now, I know it's hard to tell on this small screen, but I am tall, and I have always been tall. I mean, I was 6 feet at birth, or so it seemed. I was always standing in the back of the class on those class pictures, or enduring those little people who would run by and they'd look up and they'd be like, "How's the weather up there?" And as I got older, I used my wit and I would say to them, "It's raining." Now, the truth is, I liked being tall until I got to adolescence. And it was about that time I started to feel like King Kong, just kind of towering above everybody, when all the little boys who I thought were so cute were running around my ankles. And people would say to me, "Ingrid, be patient. The boys will go through a growth spurt." Okay. 2 did. But all of this for me was adding up in my mind to be, I probably would not be wearing heels at prom. Would have been nice to have a grandmother who said, "You know, my dear, you don't want to put the cart before the horse." Now, also growing up, I always had long hair, which I usually wore in braids or in a ponytail. But then Dorothy Hamill won the gold medal in women's figure skating at the Olympics. And Dorothy Hamill, I mean, just as beautiful as she was on the ice as she did her double axels and her Hamill camels, was her hair, which she had cut in this adorable little bob. It became known as the Hamill wedge. And I wanted that haircut. And so I somehow convinced my parents to let me get my first ever beauty parlor haircut. So I went in there, I sat in the chair. The beautician, she fluffed the cape, she wrapped it around my neck. I had this picture of Dorothy Hamill. I said, make it so. She nodded. The beautician, then she went and took my long hair, she braided it down my back, one long braid. And then she tied that braid off and she sawed away at the base of my neck at that braid. And at last it was emancipated. And she gave me that braid and I took it home and I have it to this day. But then she said, I can't give you that haircut. What? She said, no, it's too short. If I gave you that haircut, when you got home and looked in the mirror, you would be shocked. So she proceeded to give me a page boy, which is when your hair comes down and it curls under all the way around. Now, a page boy, it is a perfectly fine haircut on other people. But for me, I mean, my hair had just been recently emancipated from all that length. And there was like all this body and all this curl. And she had to wrestle it into that page boy with this huge round brush and a blow dryer. So by the time she was done, my hair like went out and then curled under. So by the time I got home and looked in the mirror, I was shocked. I mean, tears flowed. And if I could have, I would have taken that braid and reattached it to the back of my head with super glue. But at last, my tears dried. I stepped outside my room and I heard my parents talking in the living room. And I heard my father say, well, we just won't tell her what it looks like. So I ran into the living room and I said, what does it look like? What? Now, I had demanded honesty from my father, and he delivered. He said, it looks like a lampshade. Would have been nice to have a grandmother say, oh, true, my dear, but you must admit it is a fine lampshade. So it's 11th grade. I'm 6 feet tall with a lampshade hairdo, and it is time for prom. Now, in my school, in getting ready for prom, that meant you also had to get the royalty lined up. And at every formal dance, we had a king and a queen, and then 2 sets of princes and princesses. And the royalty, we were elected by the student body. So it was kind of this democratic monarchy. And the rule in my school was that once you were elected royalty for a dance, you could not be elected royalty again. So my class had actually shown very little self-restraint early on. By the end of our freshman year, we had pretty much used up all the A-list royalty. So by the time we got to my junior year, we were kind of reaching far down in the barrel. So it's 2 days before prom. I'm standing in front of my locker and the head of the royalty committee comes rushing up to me and she says, Ingrid, I have such great news. You have been elected queen of the junior prom. Okay, one problem. I am not going to the prom because no one asked me. Because you see, in my school, especially at that time, boys asked girls to prom. I mean, that's the way it worked. It was like the law. So I tried to advocate my throne, but she would not have it. She became determined to find me a date. And what I think happened is that this distress call went out to all the boys who had not yet asked girls to junior prom. And I imagine this ragtag group of individuals all assembling in the situation room. My name is Roderick. I'm 4'9" and I'm reporting for duty, ma'am. And I can just see the head of the royalty committee saying, boys, you are volunteering for a very dangerous mission because she's tall. And if she wears heels, I mean, just to get a look at her, you risk a serious neck injury. I mean, not to mention she has hair like living room furniture. But we must get our queen to the prom. Good luck and Godspeed. Well, the next day, one day before prom, I'm standing in front of my locker and I hear this, "Hi, Ingrid." And I kind of look around and I'm like, "Oh, hi, Roderick." And he says, "Yeah, I heard that you were elected queen of the junior prom, but nobody asked you. And well, I'm not doing anything on Saturday. And so, I mean, I can take you if you want." This is not at all how I pictured it. I mean, that the whole act of asking me to prom would be an act of self-sacrifice on behalf of the junior class. And for a moment, I tried to picture this, you know, Roderick in his suit and me in my dress, and how I would pick him up and we would dance. You know, I let him down gently. "Thank you, but no thank you." And then I walked down the hall, I went around the corner, I ran into another boy who asked me to prom. I mean, it happened again at lunch. I was starting to relate to how King Kong had climbed up that big building and was batting away the tiny planes. It was like I was clinging to my one shred of dignity and batting away my suitors. Well, in the end, I did not go to the dance for which I was elected queen. And that night, that Saturday night, at the end of the dance, the president of the junior class, bless her heart, came by my family's house and dropped off my dozen roses and my tiara. It would have been nice to have a grandmother who would coax me out from under the couch and say to me, "My dear, you put on that tiara and you hold your head high, for you are Queen Kong." Now, I did not have a wisdom-spouting grandmother, but I did have a grandmother who introduced me to sea glass, which is created when something is shattered. And then time and tide works its magic, and there it is lying on the beach like jewels, ready to be picked up and examined in a new light.